It's Jenn Foster here with the Elite Expert Insider podcast. Unfortunately, Melanie Johnson can't be here today, so I'm going to be interviewing our author today, who's also a business owner, and we're going to be learning some really awesome things. So we have Jeremy Fisher here today. He's in the UK, and he has written 8 books, 13 total books between him and his wife. And not only are we going to be talking about the content of those books, but we're also going to be talking about the business of podcasting, the voice, how you can be a better speaker. He is a lifetime coach and author about how to use your voice in a proper way. He's had singing auditions, opera company, all different things. So we're going to dive into it all. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Jen. It's lovely to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit how you got started into voice and got started as a singer and all the things you do now. How did you get started in it?
Yeah, I was a sort of reluctant singer, really. I started playing piano when I was 6, and I was always going to be a musician, and went through music college, graduated, did all of those things. And I was playing piano, and I was playing piano for singers. And I started to notice that they couldn't understand how to sing the music. And I went, oh, it's so straightforward. For heaven's sake, it's like this. Just do that. And they went, oh, that's really good. And I thought, oh, there's clearly a business in insulting people. So I love working with singers. I married a singer, so I love working with singers. And then I became a singer myself because I wanted to work out, when you play piano, you've got an instrument in front of you, you can see how it works. But when you're a singer, the instrument is inside your throat. You can't see how it works. It's very much by feel and understanding. And I thought, I've got to be able to do this if I'm going to coach people.
Yeah.
So I started to learn singing myself. And the thing that I specialize in, classical, musical theatre, comedy songs, there's all sorts of areas. But then I started to move into contemporary stuff as well. And now I coach absolutely across the board.
Okay. And when you first started piano, was it more classical or what? Because I learned piano from 8. I did for 10 years. I did lessons, but it was mostly classical, Suzuki Method, learning by ear, playing the classical pieces. So did you start with classical and then all of a sudden you were reading music and I always envy people who can just sit down and play whatever's in front of them. So that's pretty much what you did,
That is actually
right?
that's a speciality. Yeah, I was completely classical, totally classical, all the way through up until leaving college at 21. Completely classical, did concertos, did all sorts of things to doing because I got bored very easily. And so I just got books of music out of the library and I learned to read them. And so one of my skills now is that I read anything that someone will put in front of me. And it's very useful when you're playing for singers because you're playing so many different pieces and so much repertoire, and you have to learn things really fast. So being able to see what's on the page, take it in, reproduce it is a real skill. So yeah, completely classical. And then after I left college, it was like, well, I want to be employable.
Yeah.
So I started to expand into all sorts of things. And I went into musical theatre. I worked in London's West End for 20-something years, playing for musical theatre, coaching people, coaching for auditions. I became an audition coach, an audition pianist. So there were all sorts of things that I did to do with auditioning. And that's about finding what somebody does really well and really magnifying it. It's like, these are the skills that you have. Let's make it more obvious that you have these skills. So that whole coaching thing is really fascinating and I love doing it. I love working with other people.
Yeah, I love that you took an industry like music where most people don't make much money and turned it into a business, right? So now you're teaching, you started out by just, playing piano for singers, but then it was like helping them and learning. I like how you were saying, like, you can't see when you're singing, you can't see what's going on in there. So knowing how to breathe and how to, articulate your words properly. I think one of the funniest TikTok, YouTube shorts, whatever it is, Instagram reel, the funniest guy lately I've been watching, he is lip syncing, wearing a wig, lip syncing a song, and then he has captions and all the words are wrong. Like it's what you hear. It's not what they're actually saying. So it's really funny because he's
Excellent.
interpreting it a different way. And it's because most of the singers aren't, articulating their words correctly. So it doesn't sound
Yeah.
good.
It was a funny thing because, I mean, you mentioned, turning what you do into a business, and it's a real step when because I was a freelance musician for years, and therefore you're working for yourself, you're working with yourself, and you're using your talents, and then to turn it into a business is quite a step.
Mhm.
And I think it's a really interesting one because suddenly you are interested in other people, you're employing other people, you're building a brand, you're doing all sorts of things that you wouldn't normally do. And it's a very interesting process to go through. I mean, our company, we call it Vocal Process, you'd call it Vocal Process. But Vocal Process is, we built into the company the ethos that anything is acceptable. Anything is acceptable. And when you're singing, when you're learning classical music, it's like classical music is everything and everything else is terrible and it's all unhealthy. And that's all nonsense. Anything as far as we're concerned is good if you can repeat it. And in the musical theatre world, if you can repeat it 8 shows a week for a year,
Right.
that means that you have a really good technique, very solid. You can produce the sounds. There's no harm. There's no damage. So there's a lot of different sounds now that are being made that we have to teach. And it's one of the things we're now, not only do we teach it, but we're now teaching our teachers as well. So we now have a whole roster of teachers who do what we do with the ethos that we use. And I think it's really fascinating when you turn yourself into a business.
Yeah, so I like that. So you kind of franchised yourself. I mean, so you have
Yes,
certified coaches that teach what you know, right? So
we
tell us
do.
a little bit about that
Yeah.
process and how you got into that, because I know some people are like, I want to either franchise or duplicate myself. How do I do that? Right.
This is nearly 20 years ago now, we started an accreditation program.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting doing an accreditation program because music and singing are an unregulated profession. There are no sort of government bodies that tell you can become a doctor or you need to train in this particular way. There's none of that in music and there's none of it in singing. And so we wanted to help people become better teachers so that they can then work with their students more effectively, more efficiently on a wider range of things, and also to a higher level. And so we started an accreditation program. I think we're in its 4th version now. But the pandemic was great for us because suddenly we had to put everything online. So our accreditation program for singing teachers and vocal coaches is now 100% online. And so we now have registered teachers in Australia, in India, in the UK, in all across Europe. And so it became possible then to open ourselves to a much wider audience. And they do a full year of training with us. And this is so basically it's a meeting a fortnight live. We also have an enormous resource list behind us because we have what we call our learning lounge, which is all of our resources for the last 25 years. There's 600 resources in there, so they get to access that as well. We have mentoring sessions, we have one-to-one sessions, we have buddying sessions, so we buddy them up together that they can learn. There's a whole process that we go through. And yeah, it's actually really effective. And we're producing the teachers now that we've always wanted to produce. So not only are they really good at doing the technical stuff, so teaching people technique, but also the whole process of becoming a performer and even just performers are so brave because you walk out on stage and you're there.
Yeah.
You're alone. It's just you.
It's just that.
So that takes that takes some guts, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been on stage a few times. It does take guts. Let's talk about that a little bit with speaking. So if an entrepreneur wanted to go speak on stages, do you feel like they need some coaching? Do they need some, training on voice? Because there's books out there that talk about, how to walk on the stage and how to speak, or how to keep the audience's attention. But what about like the voice structure and fluctuations and going down and up and all of that? Do you do a lot of coaching to help authors, or not just authors, but entrepreneurs in a speaking career?
Oh, yes. I started in this a few years ago and it's been really interesting. It's a sort of transfer of skills
Mm-hmm.
because when you are working with singers, that's elite voice use. And so you're dealing with pitch range, so whether they're singing high or low, You're dealing with tempo, you're dealing with rhythm, you're dealing with volume, dynamics, interest, communication. There's all sorts of things that you can then transfer into a speaking voice. And so I've been working with presenters, I've been working with voiceover artists, and I've been working with podcast guests, podcast hosts as well, because there's something about when you have information, and a lot of entrepreneurs have really good information, really powerful information, but how do they get it across? And so there's a whole level of communication skills where you might know your stuff, but you actually have to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes to go, here's how I understand it, here's how you might understand it. And one of the things that I love doing is you have this piece of information or this technique or this unique take, and you have to explain it to other people, and there are steps to do it. You can't just sort of give them the information because they might not be ready for it, or they might not understand your language or your jargon or anything like that. And I think it's so interesting to work out the steps for how you get information across. And then also, by the way, how you do it in an interesting way.
Yeah. How do you keep your audience attention? How to do it in an interesting way? What are some of the tips that you give podcasters and speakers to be more interesting or to, keep attention?
It's a really interesting one because you sort of have to take people from where they are. So I'll often get people to send me recordings of them either. And there are two versions of this, reading stuff out and then conversational chat. These are very different because you actually use you almost use a different voice. You use a different speed, you use different prosody. Prosody is the melody that you use when you speak. And then with conversational, it's like, what tempo do you use? What's your pitch range? How is your articulation? There's all sorts of things. So if I give you some demonstrations, these are people that I've worked with. There was one guy who he basically didn't move pitch that much. And so, it didn't matter how interesting what he was saying was, then there was it was very much on the same level. And then occasionally he'd sort of hesitate and people were asleep.
Yeah.
Didn't matter how interesting the information was. They just couldn't cope with having information given to them at that pace.
He could have been a
and
good
at that pitch.
hypnotist, maybe.
Absolutely. I don't think that was the point, though.
So how did you help him, or what kind of tips did you give him?
First of all, we started on pitch. And so if I then give you a demonstration, I mean, I'm doing it all the time, but if I give you a demonstration of pitch range, then we have a lovely little sentence that I use in the UK, which is, I'd like a tea, please, not a coffee. And if you do, I'd like a tea, please, my voice is relatively high in my range. So if I go up there and I sort of carry on talking, it sounds a bit ridiculous when I'm up here because of the sort of normal voice that I have. But that means that I've got a really extended pitch range. And the more pitch range that you don't have to have a huge pitch range, but you do have to have variation.
Right.
So if I was to talk to you, okay, let me give you a sentence. This is the house that Jack built, is pretty much all on the same center, same pitch, same range. Whereas this is the house that Jack built. And it's really interesting that when you use more pitch range, suddenly people go, oh, there's something interesting in there. I don't know what it is, but I'll listen harder so that I can,
Yeah.
And I think intrigue is such a great place to be because people want to find out more about what you're doing or what you're talking about.
Right. Well, let me try it. So I need to go high. So I would like a tea, please, not a coffee. If something, did I do it right? Maybe listeners at home could try it.
That is pretty
Maybe
good.
listeners could try it. Not a coffee didn't really sound very good. But I'd like a tea, please, like higher up, right?
Yeah. And it's very interesting because you are covering a pitch range of at least 8 notes there. And that is pretty good for a speaking voice. Singing voices cover 16 notes, 16, 17, 18 notes, and sometimes more. I mean, when you're in Mariah Carey land, then you are covering hundreds of notes.
Yeah.
Because she can go so high. But when you're in speaking range, you need probably at least 8 notes. So if I was to go there and then I went up to there, that's about 8-note range. So interestingly, it actually sounds quite a big range when I'm demonstrating it sort of one after another.
Yeah.
So anything to do with change is really good when you are presenting.
Yes. So on a podcast or speaking, having the range and going up and down sounds better. I know there's a lot of churches that have the pastors or the speakers, the bishops or whatever they're called, speaking. And if their voices are monotone, nobody likes to listen to them. But when their voices go up, almost like I think one of my mom's favorite speakers actually sounds like he's reading a story to a child, which kind of is annoying to me. But when you listen
Yep.
to him, he's going up like this and then down like this. And it does sound like he's reading a story to a child, but that's making it so it's more smooth
Absolutely.
and pleasant and calm, which is what he's trying to put across. This is more of a peaceful feeling.
Absolutely, yes. It's so interesting when you take information. There's a beautiful list of videos on YouTube which is explaining a concept to 5 different people. And it's like explain it to an 8-year-old, and then explain it to an expert, and then explain it to somebody in your field, and then explain it to an adult who sort of knows a bit about it, but not much. And it's really interesting how people's pitch range changes.
Hmm.
Now, there is one proviso in this one, which is this is a fascinating one. If you do the same pattern, then what happens? It becomes monotonous and you sort of come to expect it. And then you aren't really listening. You're just waiting for the next pattern drop. So the pattern of speaking remains exactly the same. And although there's change in there in pitch, it doesn't actually change sentence by sentence. It's exactly the same thing. That can get very irritating very quickly.
Yes, and that's probably why I was thinking that I didn't like his voice, because it does seem too monotonous. Like I know when he's going to go up and down. So then you do kind of glaze over and
Yeah.
not really listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's important for podcasting as well as for speaking on stage, is knowing what kind of rhythm, right, to keep or to change up.
Absolutely. And again, change is good. In this circumstance, change is good. And with rhythm, I'd separate rhythm and speed out.
Mhm.
Speed is a really interesting one because if you want to gloss over something, if you want to just deliver something, if you want to get the point across, then you can speed up and then you slow down with anything interesting. And as a voiceover artist, I do a lot of really complicated voiceovers where you have to get a brand name out or you have to get a really specific piece of information that the client wants to highlight. And what then happens is that you slow down at that point so that people go, oh, that's the interesting bit. That's the important bit.
Mhm.
And then you speed up through any of the other information. And there are lovely examples all over the internet on this one, but particularly when people say terms and conditions apply at the end of an advert and they go, terms and conditions apply.
Yeah.
And that's the fastest they can get it out because it's like, it's unimportant. Everybody knows that terms and conditions apply. Let's just get that information out there. So again, you can use, I'm doing it now, you can use speed in order to highlight something. And then people can they can be half listening. And then when you slow down, they go, oh, that must be important. He slowed down. And then they tune back in again. Really important. I don't mind if people turn off for the moment, but, I'm going to let them know what the important bits are.
Yeah, I love this. I can talk about all this stuff for many hours on end, but tell people what your latest book is and how they can, learn more about this voice and speaking and
Well, my latest book has just been published. It's called Just How Boring Are You? And it's all about how to be a great podcast guest, how to communicate with your audience, basically how to give people a good time when they're listening to you. And podcasting is so crucial for this. It's like podcasting is a conversation like we're having, but we have eavesdroppers, we have people listening in. And so you want to be interesting. And there's all sorts of techniques that I use in the book, like the ones we've been talking about, in order to help people work out what they're doing, what they're not doing, and how to improve it. And it's not just vocal technique, although vocal technique is a big part of the book. It is, after all, one of the main things I do. But I also help people to find the interesting stories in whatever their particular area of expertise is or whatever it is they want to talk about, because people love stories.
mm-hmm.
So there's loads of exercises and techniques in the book. And in fact, I also include a full vocal warm-up for people who have never done a vocal warm-up before.
Oh, that's great.
And honestly, on podcasts, we need vocal warm-ups because the microphone picks up everything.
Mm-hmm. What would be an example so we can have our listeners hear what a vocal warm-up would sound like?
Some of the exercises that I do include things like range, but I'm doing it without words. So you're doing so you're working your range without necessarily using
Okay.
words.
I like that. We'll have to have you try it at home and get his book. It's called Why Are You So Boring? Is that what you said?
Just how boring
Just
are
How
you?
Boring Are You? Not why are you boring? Just How Boring Are You? You can get that on Amazon or anywhere books are sold, right? And where else can people go to find you?
Well, they can find the book. I've done a bit.ly link, so it's bit.ly/just how boring are you?
Perfect.
And that will take you straight to the book. If they want to find me other than the book, then go to vocalprocess.co.uk. That's co.uk.
Perfect. We'll put that link up in the show notes so people can get that. And look for his other podcast that we're going to be interviewing him on Elite Publishing podcast as well. Thank you for being here, Jeremy. And we look forward to working with you in the future to help us with our podcast voices.
Excellent. Thank you, Jen. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Well, we hope you subscribe and like our podcast and share it with your friends. And if you're looking to publish a book, you could contact us at eliteonlinepublishing.com.
Hey, are you looking to increase your revenue, build credibility, and elevate your brand? This podcast is brought to you by Elite Online Publishing, an innovative publishing and full-spectrum marketing company. They will publish and market your book to make it a #1 bestseller. Becoming an author is the best way to market your business. So contact them at eliteonlinepublishing.com today. All of their authors become #1 bestsellers.